Elvis Presley's granddaughter, Riley Keough, is opening up about her plans for Graceland and a promise to her mother.
For decades, Graceland has offered Elvis Presley fans something almost impossible to find in the world of celebrity. A place where the past still feels close enough to touch. Visitors can walk through the mansion, see the rooms where Elvis entertained friends, admire the famous jungle room, and stand quietly in the meditation garden. But there is one part of the estate that remains completely different. Upstairs. That staircase leads to a private world the public has never been allowed to explore. No regular tours. No crowds. No endless stream of cameras. Just a handful of people who have had personal reasons to cross that boundary. And that is exactly why the second floor has become one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Elvis Presley. Because downstairs, Graceland tells the story of the superstar. Upstairs, according to accounts surrounding the Presley family, it tells the story of the man. The distinction matters. Elvis didn't buy Graceland simply because he wanted a mansion. At the height of his early fame, he was already surrounded by screaming fans, reporters, photographers, and people constantly trying to get closer to him. Privacy had become something money could buy only temporarily. Graceland gave him a retreat. But over the years, the house changed with him. It became more colorful, more unusual, and increasingly personal. Rooms were remodeled. Furniture came and went. The jungle room became one of the most recognizable spaces associated with Elvis. Music was recorded there. Family members gathered there. And eventually, the mansion itself became part home, part studio, and part sanctuary. Yet the upstairs remained different. That is where Elvis's bedroom was located. That is where his personal belongings remained. And that is also where he spent much of his private time during the final years of his life. After Elvis died in 1977, the second floor was not turned into another tourist attraction. Instead, it remained private. That decision has created decades of speculation. What exactly is still up there? Some stories claim that personal belongings were left almost exactly where Elvis had kept them. Other accounts describe books, clothing, photographs, records, and objects that offer a much more intimate picture of his daily life than anything displayed downstairs. And then there is the most sensitive room of all. The bathroom where Elvis was found on August 16, 1977. Because of what happened there, the room carries a weight that no museum exhibit could ever reproduce. The Presley family has treated that portion of Graceland as private, and the public has never been given the kind of access that would turn it into an ordinary attraction. That privacy has only made the mystery bigger. For Elvis fans, the upstairs isn't simply another floor of a famous house. It represents the final chapter of his life. And this is where Riley Keough's connection to Graceland becomes especially important. Riley isn't simply another person fascinated by Elvis. She is his granddaughter, Lisa Marie Presley's daughter, and part of the family that inherited responsibility for his legacy. That gives her relationship with Graceland a completely different meaning. To millions of visitors, the mansion is a historic landmark. To Riley, it is part of her family history. That difference changes the way the house is remembered. Stories surrounding the upstairs have often suggested that it contains hidden secrets, forgotten recordings, private writings, and belongings that fans have never seen. Some of these stories have grown through years of speculation, while others are based on the simple fact that the public has never been allowed to see the rooms for itself. And whenever something remains hidden for decades, people naturally begin filling in the blanks. One of the most persistent theories involves Elvis's personal writings. Elvis was deeply interested in religion, spirituality, philosophy, and ideas about life beyond the world of fame. Books and religious material were part of his personal environment, and accounts of his later years often describe someone searching for meaning while struggling under the enormous pressure of being Elvis Presley. That creates an intriguing possibility. What if the most revealing things left upstairs aren't secret photographs or shocking discoveries at all? What if they're simply words? Notes that were never intended for publication. Personal thoughts written during the hours when the world outside Graceland had gone quiet. Fragments of ideas, unfinished thoughts, maybe even lyrics that never became songs. This is where fact and legend become difficult to separate. The source material surrounding the upstairs contains dramatic claims about notebooks, letters, hidden boxes, and other personal objects, but those specific details should not be treated as independently confirmed discoveries. What is established is that Elvis's private life at Graceland was far less visible than his public image, and that the upstairs remains protected from ordinary public access. That alone is enough to create an extraordinary mystery. Because imagine the contrast. Downstairs, millions of people have walked through rooms connected to Elvis's public identity. Upstairs, the story becomes intensely personal. The clothes he wore privately, the books he read, the things he kept close, the spaces where he could shut the door and become something other than the king of rock and roll. And perhaps that is why the Presley family has been so protective of the second floor. It isn't necessarily about hiding something. It may be about preserving something. There is a huge difference. When Elvis died, the world immediately wanted answers. Fans wanted to know what had happened. Newspapers wanted headlines. Conspiracy theories appeared almost immediately. Some people couldn't accept that the man who had seemed larger than life could simply be gone. And because Graceland's upstairs remained inaccessible, it became the perfect blank space for those theories to grow. The most famous theory is, of course, that Elvis somehow survived. According to versions of the story, Elvis allegedly arranged his own disappearance, escaped the pressures of fame, and began a secret life somewhere far from Memphis. Some variations even connect the theory to an alleged hidden tunnel beneath or around Graceland. But there is a major problem. There is no credible evidence establishing that such a tunnel was used as an escape route by Elvis, and the claims about a secret passage have never been substantiated in the way a story this extraordinary would require. Still, the rumor refuses to disappear. Why? Because Elvis was already a master of privacy. He used aliases. He traveled with enormous security. He sometimes disappeared from public view. His life was filled with people who knew how to protect his personal movements. So when he died, some fans found it easier to imagine a final disappearance than to accept that the story had ended. The alleged tunnel became part of that mythology. Then came supposed sightings. Again and again, people claimed they had seen Elvis after 1977. A man at an airport, a stranger who looked like him, a photograph that supposedly showed him years later. A person in a completely different state who somehow had the same unmistakable appearance. Most of these stories were never verified, but Elvis was uniquely suited to this kind of legend. His face was everywhere. His voice was instantly recognizable. And millions of people wanted to believe that somewhere, somehow, the king was still alive. There was even speculation surrounding the spelling of Elvis's middle name. His legal middle name was Aaron, while the gravestone famously uses Aaron. Conspiracy theorists have treated this difference as evidence that something was wrong with the official story. But a spelling difference by itself does not establish that Elvis survived or that his death was staged. Still, once a mystery becomes part of popular culture, facts aren't always what keep it alive. Sometimes it's the unanswered questions. And Graceland has plenty of those. The upstairs remains closed. Private belongings remain protected. The family has reasons to maintain boundaries. And Elvis himself left behind a life complicated enough that almost any unanswered detail can become the beginning of another theory. But perhaps the most fascinating question isn't whether Elvis escaped through a tunnel. Perhaps it's what the upstairs reveals about the man who needed that privacy in the first place. Because the further you move away from the stage, the less recognizable Elvis becomes. The rhinestone jumpsuits disappear. The screaming crowds disappear. The television cameras disappear. And what remains is a man sitting alone inside his own house. A man surrounded by records, books, memories, and the enormous burden of being Elvis Presley. That may be the real secret of the upstairs. Not that it contains some unbelievable hidden escape route. Not that it proves Elvis survived. But that it preserves the version of Elvis the public rarely saw. And Riley Keough now stands at the center of that legacy. After the death of Lisa Marie Presley in 2023, Riley became one of the key figures responsible for carrying the Presley family legacy forward. That responsibility isn't simply financial. It is emotional, historical, and cultural. She inherited a name that belongs to one of the most famous performers who ever lived. She inherited a family story that millions of people feel personally connected to. And she inherited Graceland. But inheriting Graceland also means deciding what should be shared and what should remain private. That is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because if the upstairs ever truly opened, the mystery would disappear. The moment tourists could walk through Elvis's bedroom, photograph his private belongings, and examine every corner of the second floor, much of the mythology would be gone. The questions would finally have answers. And perhaps that is precisely why the doors remain closed. Some mysteries survive because nobody knows the truth. Others survive because someone knows it and chooses not to reveal everything. And when it comes to Graceland, that distinction may be the most important one of all. Because there could still be personal papers, recordings, photographs, and objects associated with Elvis that have never become part of the public experience. Whether any of them contain a genuine revelation is another question entirely. But one thing is certain. The story of Elvis Presley did not end when the gates of Graceland opened to tourists. In many ways, that was when another chapter began. And upstairs, behind that closed door, a private piece of that chapter remains untouched by the crowds. But there is one part of this mystery that becomes even more fascinating when you look at Elvis's final years. The possibility that music he recorded privately may still exist somewhere beyond the material already released to the public. Because Elvis was still making music near the end of his life. And some recordings were never intended to become records. So what happened to those tapes? Were they destroyed? Were they archived? Or could something from those final private sessions still be waiting somewhere inside the Presley vault? That question takes us deeper into the mystery of Graceland, and into the possibility that Elvis may have left behind one final musical chapter that the world has never heard. But the mystery surrounding Graceland doesn't end with the locked doors. One of the biggest questions is what happened to Elvis's private recordings. By the final years of his life, Elvis was still making music, sometimes in unusual and deeply personal circumstances. Some of his later sessions took place inside Graceland's famous jungle room, where he recorded material that would eventually become part of his final releases. But recording sessions don't always tell the whole story. Musicians often create alternate takes, unfinished performances, rehearsals, and casual recordings that were never intended for an album. Elvis had spent decades in recording studios, and it is entirely possible that material existed beyond what record companies eventually released. That possibility has fueled stories of a hidden Elvis vault. Some rumored recordings have appeared over the years, but many turned out to be alternate takes, misidentified performances, or outright fakes. So far, there is no confirmed evidence that a secret collection of completed albums is sitting untouched upstairs at Graceland. Still, the possibility of undiscovered personal material remains fascinating. Because Elvis wasn't only a performer when he recorded. Sometimes he was simply a man experimenting with a song, testing his voice, or singing for people close to him. Those recordings, if they survived, could reveal something more valuable than another hit song. They could reveal Elvis without the stage persona. And that brings us back to Riley Keough. Her responsibility isn't simply to preserve a building. She is helping preserve a complicated family history. Elvis's legacy contains enormous fame, incredible music, family memories, painful moments, and decades of speculation. Riley has inherited all of it. That may explain why the upstairs remains private. There is a difference between protecting history and exploiting it. Opening Elvis's bedroom to thousands of tourists might generate curiosity, but it could also destroy the very privacy that made the room meaningful to his family. For fans, that can be frustrating. They want to see everything. They want answers. They want to know what Elvis kept beside his bed, what books he read, what recordings he made, and what the final days inside Graceland were really like. But perhaps the most powerful part of Graceland is that visitors cannot see everything. Some doors remain closed. Some memories remain inside the family, and some questions may never receive definitive answers. The theories about secret tunnels, hidden recordings, mysterious sightings, and Elvis somehow surviving his death will probably continue for generations. But none of those theories changes the documented reality that Elvis Presley died in 1977 and that Graceland became one of the most important places connected to his life and legacy. The real mystery may be much simpler. What was Elvis like when nobody was watching? That is the version of him that can never be completely recreated by a museum exhibit. And perhaps somewhere behind those upstairs doors, the answer still exists. In old photographs, personal belongings, handwritten pages, or recordings that were never meant for the public. Riley Keough doesn't have to reveal every one of those things. In fact, protecting them may be part of her responsibility. Because Elvis gave the world almost everything. His music, his image, his performances, his personality. His private struggles became public history. Maybe the one thing he still has is that locked upstairs floor. A place where the crowds stop, where the cameras stop, and where, for a moment, Elvis Presley is not the king. He's simply Elvis. And that may be the greatest secret Graceland has left.